There is a particular scent to loneliness. It isn't just the absence of sound or the stillness of empty rooms. It's the faint, dusty perfume of lavender furniture polish on a table set for one. It's the ghost of 1,000 Sunday roasts that have long since cooled in a kitchen that's too quiet. I know that scent intimately. It has been my companion for the last 5 years, here in this modest apartment in Ohio, with its beige walls and its view of a parking lot that never seems to fill. At 72, you'd think I'd be used to it, that the sharp edges of solitude would have worn smooth by now. But some aches only deepen with time, settling into the marrow of your bones like a persistent winter chill. My name is Edna Robinson, and this isn't just the story of my loneliness. It's the story of a betrayal that fractured my family, of a legacy that was stolen, and of a love so profound, so cleverly disguised, that it took me half a lifetime to finally understand its shape. It all begins and ends with my grandmother, Eleanor. She wasn't a woman of soft edges and whispered lullabies. Eleanor was carved from the very bedrock of the state, a woman who built an empire not with a silver spoon, but with splinters in her palms and iron in her soul. The Grandview Hotels. A name that now conjures images of gleaming glass and chrome, of valet parking and champagne flutes. But I remember its humble heart. I remember the first Grandview, a 12-room inn on a dusty road just outside of town, with a sign that flickered on and off and a front porch swing that groaned a welcome to every weary traveler. My childhood was woven into the very fabric of that place. While other little girls were playing with dolls, I was learning how to fold a fitted sheet into a perfect, crisp rectangle. I learned how to balance a tray laden with a full breakfast, how to soothe a guest whose car had broken down, how to listen, really listen, to the stories of people just passing through. Grandma Eleanor didn't just give me chores, she gave me a purpose. "Edna, my girl," she'd say, her voice rough as gravel, "this isn't about beds and breakfast. It's about sanctuary. It's about giving someone a little piece of peace in a chaotic world. You remember that. This business is built on heart, not just profit." My mother, Clara, wanted nothing to do with it. She was a dreamer, a romantic who found the smell of bleach and industry suffocating. She longed for art galleries and symphony halls, for a life of delicate things. She saw the hotel as a chain, tethering her to a town she despised. When I was 10, she left. She packed a single suitcase, kissed my forehead with lips that tasted of regret and Chanel No. 5, and vanished into the smog of Los Angeles. The silence she left behind in our little house was deafening. It was Grandma Eleanor who filled it. She became my mother, my father, my mentor, my best friend. Our world was the hotel. We'd sit in her small, cluttered office behind the front desk, the air thick with the scent of old leather and ledger books, and she would tell me her plans. She showed me how to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate with a supplier, how to look a man in the eye and not flinch when asking for what was fair. She was preparing me. I knew it in my bones. I was the heir to her kingdom of kindness, to her empire of effort. Then, when I was 25, the unthinkable happened. A swift and silent aneurysm took her in her sleep. The world, which had once felt so solid and sure with her in it, simply fell away from beneath my feet. The grief was a physical weight, a stone lodged in my throat that made it hard to breathe. But amidst that suffocating sorrow, there was a flicker of light. Her will. The reading of the will was held in a lawyer's office that smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant and old paper. I sat alone on one side of the vast mahogany table. And then, the door opened. In walked my mother, Clara. Time had been kind to her. She was still willowy and elegant, her hair a perfect silver bob. But it was the man beside her who commanded the room. Robert. He was handsome, I'll give him that. Tall, with a head of thick, salt and pepper hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his cold, blue eyes. He was a financial consultant, my mother whispered, her hand resting possessively on his arm. They had been married for 6 months. I hadn't been invited to the wedding. The lawyer, a Mr. Henderson with kind eyes and a sorrowful demeanor, cleared his throat and began to read. The words started as I expected. Small bequests to long-serving staff, donations to local charities. And then he came to the heart of it. I, Eleanor Marie Prescott, being of sound mind, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment she would formally pass the torch. Do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including my sole ownership of the Grandview Hotel Group and all its assets and holdings, to my beloved granddaughter, Edna Marie Robinson, to be held in a protective trust until she reaches the age of 30, at which point full control will be transferred to her. A sob of relief and profound love caught in my throat. She had done it. She had kept her promise. But Mr. Henderson hadn't finished. He adjusted his glasses. There is, however, a codicil. A recent addition. The room grew still. Robert leaned forward, his expression one of polite interest. Given Edna's youth and the complex nature of the business, Mr. Henderson continued, reading carefully, I appoint my son-in-law, Robert Sterling, as the executor of the trust and the interim chief executive officer of the Grandview Hotel Group. He shall receive a generous salary and have full operational and financial authority until such a time as Edna turns 30, or until he and the board of trustees deem her fully prepared to assume leadership. The air was punched from my lungs. I stared, uncomprehending. Interim CEO? Full authority? Robert? A man my grandmother had met only twice? A man she had, in private, told me she didn't entirely trust? It made no sense. It was a betrayal from beyond the grave. Robert stood, smoothing his immaculate suit jacket. Eleanor and I had many discussions before her passing, he said, his voice a smooth, oily baritone. She was concerned, Edna. She felt you lacked the killer instinct, the business acumen for the modern market. She asked me to step in, to guide the company, and to guide you. My mother rushed to my side, her arms around me. Oh, darling, it's for the best, she cooed. Robert is a genius. He'll protect Grandma's legacy. And it's only for 5 years. It will fly by. But as I looked into Robert's triumphant eyes over my mother's shoulder, I knew with a cold, sinking certainty that 5 years was an eternity. And that my grandmother's empire, the kingdom she had built with her own 2 hands, the future she had promised me, had just been handed to a stranger. The 5 years that followed were a masterclass in subtle erosion. Robert didn't storm the castle gates. He simply, patiently, loosened every stone until the entire structure was ready to crumble at his touch. He moved my mother and himself into Grandma Eleanor's old house, a beautiful, sprawling Victorian she had loved more than anything. He called it consolidating assets. I was allowed to keep my modest apartment, a concession he made with a magnanimous wave of his hand, as if he were granting me a royal pardon. He then moved the corporate headquarters from the familiar, slightly shabby office attached to the original Grandview into a slick, impersonal glass tower in downtown Cleveland. My old office, the one with a view of the porch swing, was given to a fresh-faced MBA who looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. Robert gave me a new title, Vice President of Historical Outreach. It was a nothing title, a hollowed-out shell of a position with no budget, no staff, and no influence. My job was to preserve the cherished legacy of the Grandview brand, which in practice meant I was trotted out for ribbon cuttings at newly renovated hotels, where I was expected to smile wanly and talk about the good old days, to reporters who were only interested in Robert's vision for the future. And what a vision it was. He began a ruthless campaign of streamlining. The heart and soul of Grandview had always been its people, the desk clerks who remembered returning guests' names, the housekeepers who left handwritten notes of welcome, the cooks who knew how Mr. Henderson liked his eggs. Robert called them redundant overhead. He replaced them with automated check-in kiosks, outsourced cleaning crews, and pre-packaged, frozen meals prepared in a central facility 100 miles away. The scent of fresh coffee and baking bread was replaced by the sterile odor of industrial air freshener. I fought him. Oh, how I fought. I would march into his sterile new office, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. You're destroying what she built. I'd cry. This wasn't her vision. He would always remain calm, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. Edna, your grandmother's vision was beautiful, but it was from a different era. Business is business. We have shareholders to answer to now. Profit margins. You're too sentimental. It's a weakness. My mother, Clara, became his greatest defender. Darling, you have to understand, she'd say, pouring me a cup of tea in their newly decorated, soulless living room. Robert has increased the company's value by 40%. Grandma would be thrilled. You need to let go of the past. Let go of the past. It was like asking me to cut out my own heart. Every change Robert made was a betrayal of a specific memory. Firing old Joe, the handyman who had fixed that groaning porch swing 100 times, felt like a betrayal. Ripping out the original oak reception desk and replacing it with a minimalist slab of white marble was a betrayal. The Grandview was being stripped of its history, its soul systematically erased, and I was powerless to stop it. I felt myself shrinking, becoming a ghost in my own life. The vibrant, confident young woman my grandmother had raised was replaced by a bitter, hollowed-out shell. I stopped going to company events. I stopped fighting. The few allies I had left within the company were slowly pushed out or chose early retirement, unable to stomach the new regime. The stone of loneliness in my throat grew heavier, until some days I wondered if I would ever be able to speak without crying. The weeks leading up to my 30th birthday were the darkest. This was the finish line. The day the trust would dissolve and control of the company would, by law, revert to me. I allowed a fragile, desperate hope to bloom in my chest. Perhaps it would all be okay. Perhaps, once I was in charge, I could undo the damage. I could bring back the heart of Grandview. The day before my birthday, I was summoned to Robert's office. My mother was there, her face pale and tense. Robert stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city he now dominated. Edna, he began, without turning around. We need to talk about the transition. So do I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. My first act as CEO will be to reinstate the original management structure at the flagship inn. We're bringing back the soul of this company. Robert finally turned. He didn't look concerned. He looked pitying. Edna, there isn't going to be a transition. The room tilted. What are you talking about? The will was specific. The trust dissolves when I turn 30. That's tomorrow. The will was specific about the assets, Robert corrected smoothly. But a company is a living entity. Under my leadership, and with the full support of the Board of Trustees, a board I appointed, the Grandview Hotel Group has undergone a significant corporate restructuring. He slid a thick document across his glass desk. This is the new corporate charter. The operating company, which holds all the licenses, branding, management contracts, and debt, is now a separate entity. Grandview Holdings Incorporated. You, as the beneficiary of the will, own the original assets, the land, the physical buildings. But I am the majority shareholder and CEO of the operating company. We lease the buildings from you. I stared at the pages, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. Lease? What are you saying? I'm saying, Edna, that you own the empty shells. I own the business that makes them run. And the lease agreement, which the board has generously signed on your behalf for a term of 99 years, stipulates that you receive a fixed annual payment. It's a very generous sum, I might add. You'll be comfortable for the rest of your life. It was a masterstroke of financial treachery. He had taken the beating heart of my grandmother's empire and surgically separated it from the body, keeping the heart for himself and leaving me with a corpse. He had used the 5 years of his control not to steward the company, but to hijack it. My mother started to cry. Robert, you promised it would be fair. It is fair, Clara, he said coldly. It's business. I looked from his face, hard and triumphant, to my mother's, weak and complicit. The hope that had bloomed in my chest withered and died, turning to ash. I had lost. Not just the company, but the last tangible connection to my grandmother. Robert hadn't just stolen my future, he had desecrated my past. Without a word, I turned and walked out of that office. I walked out of the glass tower, out of the life I had known, and back to my quiet, lonely apartment. The next day, I turned 30. There was no celebration. There was only the profound, echoing silence of defeat. The scent of lavender polish in my apartment no longer smelled of cleanliness, it smelled of a museum. A museum dedicated to a life that was over. The years that followed were a study in gray. I lived on the lease payments Robert sent, each check a fresh humiliation. I paid my bills, I bought my groceries, I watched the seasons change from my window overlooking the parking lot. I became a relic, a piece of forgotten history. Occasionally, I would see an advertisement for a Grandview hotel, a sleek, modern resort in Dubai, or a chic boutique hotel in Tokyo. The name was the same, but the soul was gone. It was Robert's empire now, a global monolith that bore no resemblance to the 12-room inn with the flickering sign. My contact with my mother dwindled to a handful of strained phone calls a year. She was living a life of luxury, but her voice always sounded thin, stretched tight over a core of unhappiness. She had gotten what she wanted, a life of delicate things, but I think she finally understood that those delicate things could shatter in an instant, and that the hands holding them were cold. She passed away 10 years after Grandma Eleanor from an illness she never properly named. I think it was a broken heart. At her funeral, Robert was polite, distant. He looked older, harder. We didn't speak. And so I was truly alone. The days bled into one another. I took up knitting, then abandoned it. I tried gardening on my small balcony, but the plants always seemed to wither, as if reflecting my own inner state. My world had shrunk to these four walls, my only company the ghost of my grandmother, and the crushing weight of what might have been. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived. It was addressed to me in an elegant, looping script I didn't recognize. The return address was a law firm in a small town in Maine I'd never heard of. Puzzled, I opened it. Inside was a letter from a lawyer, an Alara Vance, and a smaller, sealed envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to me in a handwriting that stopped my heart. It was my grandmother's. With trembling hands, I read the lawyer's letter first. It stated that I was the beneficiary of a long-term safe deposit box held in my name at a private bank in Bar Harbor, Maine. The fees had been prepaid for 50 years. The key was enclosed. The letter concluded, per the instructions of the grantor, Eleanor Prescott, this box was only to be contacted upon the death of Clara Robinson Sterling or upon your 50th birthday, whichever came later. Clara had been gone for over a decade. My 50th birthday was 22 years in the past. It had taken them this long to find me? My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What was this? Why Maine? Curiosity, a feeling I thought had died long ago, sparked within me. It was the first flicker of life in that quiet apartment in years. I booked a flight, the first I'd taken in decades. I packed a small bag, my hands shaking with a nervous energy I didn't recognize. I was going to Maine. The bank in Bar Harbor was a small, stone building that looked more like a library than a financial institution. Inside, it was cool and quiet. Ms. Alara Vance was waiting for me. She was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't ask many questions. She simply verified my identity and led me to a private room where the safe deposit box was waiting. It was a long, metal box. I inserted the key, my hand trembling so violently I could barely turn it. The lid opened with a soft, sighing click. Inside, there were no stacks of bonds, no glittering jewels. There was a bundle of old, leather-bound journals, and on top of them another, thicker sealed envelope with my name on it. I picked it up, the paper feeling brittle and sacred beneath my fingers. I broke the seal. My dearest Edna, if you are reading this, then I am long gone, and so, I suspect, is your mother. And you, my darling girl, have likely lived through a great deal of pain. For that, I am more sorry than words can ever express. What I must tell you now is the hardest truth of my life. I did not trust Robert. I saw the avarice in his eyes the first moment I met him. I saw how he manipulated your mother, a woman always in search of an anchor to hold her down. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that if I left the company to you outright, he would find a way to take it. He would use your mother. He would use the legal system. He would use your own good and trusting heart against you. He would not rest until he had consumed everything I had built. So, I did the only thing I could think to do. I made him the fox guarding the henhouse, believing the hens were all that mattered. But my clever, clever Edna, the hens were never the prize. I built the Grandview from nothing. And when you build something from nothing, you learn a few tricks. You learn that the most valuable things are often hidden in plain sight. Robert saw the hotels, the brand, the revenue. He saw the surface. He never bothered to look beneath. When I bought the land for the very first Grandview Inn, I didn't just buy the plot for the building. I bought the entire, vast, wooded acreage behind it. Over the years, as I expanded, I never sold any of the original land. I quietly acquired more, parcel by parcel, under a separate corporate entity, one that has no legal connection to the Grandview Hotel Group. I called it Sanctuary Holdings. Its only asset is land. Thousands of acres of it, Edna. In Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in upstate New York, and here in Maine. Land that has, over the decades, become immensely valuable. The Grandview Hotel Group was my life's work, but it was always a business. This land, this is your legacy. This is your sanctuary. It is yours, free and clear. The deeds are in this box. Robert cannot touch it. He never knew it existed. I also knew that a pile of money, a collection of deeds, would not heal the wound I knew he would inflict. So, I am giving you one more thing. A purpose. On the mainland, the most beautiful parcel of all, overlooking the sea, there are plans. My plans. For a new kind of place. Not a hotel chain, but a single, beautiful, small inn. A place with a groaning porch swing and a kitchen that smells of fresh bread. A place for people who need a little peace. A sanctuary. Just like the first one. You don't have to build it, my love. The money from the sale of just one of the other parcels will allow you to live in comfort for 100 lifetimes. You can be free of it all. But if you are reading this, and if the fire I always saw in you still flickers, then the choice is yours. The tools are yours. I failed you in life by not being able to protect you from the Roberts of the world. I hope that in death, I can give you the freedom to build a life he can never touch. I loved you more than all the stars in the sky, my dear Edna. Now go and live. All my love forever. Grandma Eleanor. I sat in that silent, cool room, the letter pressed to my chest, and I wept. I wept for the years of loneliness, for the bitterness, for the betrayal. But mostly, I wept for the overwhelming, ferocious, brilliant love of my grandmother. She hadn't abandoned me. She had been one step ahead of everyone, playing a long game whose final move was only now being revealed. She hadn't just left me an inheritance, she had left me a redemption. I spent the rest of the day with Ms. Vance, going through the deeds, the journals filled with my grandmother's sketches and dreams for the main inn. The value of the land was staggering. It was far, far more than the $50 million empire Robert had stolen. He had taken the glittering bait, never knowing the real treasure was buried deep in the earth, waiting for me. I didn't sell the land. Not all of it. I sold a few small, strategic parcels, just as Grandma Eleanor had suggested. And then I moved to Maine. I hired a local architect and a builder who understood old-fashioned craftsmanship. We built the inn exactly as she had sketched it in her journals. We called it the Eleanor. It has 12 rooms. It has a wide, wraparound porch with a swing that groans a welcome. My office has a window that looks right out onto it. The scent of lavender polish still fills my home, but now it's mixed with the salty tang of the sea air and the rich aroma of bread baking in the oven. The silence is no longer lonely. It is peaceful, filled with the cry of gulls and the rustle of the wind in the pines. I am 72 years old. It took me most of my life to get here, to this place of quiet contentment. Sometimes I read the business news. Robert's empire, built on debt and cold calculation, eventually crumbled. An economic downturn, a few bad investments, and the house of cards he built on my grandmother's name fell apart. The Grandview hotels were sold off in pieces. He died a few years ago, penniless and alone. There was a certain poetic justice in it, but I felt no triumph. Only a quiet sadness for the misery he had sown. The past is a ghost, but it no longer haunts me. It lives here with me, in the grain of the wood on this porch, in the pages of my grandmother's journals, in the heart of this small, beautiful sanctuary by the sea. She was right. It was never about the beds and breakfast. It was always about the sanctuary. It was always about giving someone a little piece of peace. And finally, after all these years, she has given that peace to me.